Hello, everyone. Welcome to the English Speaking Show. I'm Jake.
And I'm Ella. Really glad you're here. Wherever you're listening from, welcome.
Ella, I have to tell you something embarrassing that happened to me last week.
What happened?
I was telling my colleague about a problem I had in a presentation, and I said, during I was presenting, the screen went blank.
Oh, that must have been such an awkward moment.
Yes, she looked at me like I had said something completely strange. I repeated it, same reaction. Later, she told me, Jake, you should say while you were presenting.
And I have the exact opposite story. I once told my manager, my phone rang while the meeting. He understood what I meant, but the look on his face told me something was wrong.
During and while, we both got them wrong, just in completely opposite directions.
These two words feel so similar that people just pick one and hope for the best.
But the difference is actually very simple. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
That is exactly why we made this episode, so you never have to guess between during and while again.
Okay, so let's start with during, because this is where most people make the first mistake.
During is actually the simpler of the two, and the easiest way to understand it is this. During means exactly the same thing as in the middle of. That is all it means.
Show me what you mean.
If I say, something strange happened in the middle of my job interview last year, I can replace in the middle of with during and say, something strange happened during my job interview. Same meaning, same sentence, more natural.
So during is just a cleaner way of saying in the middle of?
Exactly. And here is the one rule that covers everything. During is always followed by a noun or a noun phrase, a thing, an event, a period of time, never a subject and a verb.
And those nouns fall into two natural groups. The first group is events, things that have a clear beginning and end. During a job interview, during a wedding, during a business trip, during a power cut.
The second group is periods of time, during childhood, during the holidays, during exam season, during those first few months in a new city. And during works just as naturally with longer noun phrases. During my first week at the company, during the entire journey home, during her recovery. As long as a noun or noun phrase follows, during is correct.
And this is where learners go wrong. They try to put a full sentence after during. During I was driving, or during she was cooking. But during cannot be followed by a subject and a verb. The moment you have a subject and a verb after during, the sentence breaks.
Now, something worth knowing about the action that happens during an event. It does not have to be a single brief moment. It can last for a longer stretch within that period too.
What do you mean exactly?
You can say, my colleague sent me an urgent message during the presentation. That is one brief moment inside the presentation. But you can also say, I felt completely out of my depth during my first month at the company. That feeling lasted the whole month. During works for both. The action just has to happen within the period.
I have a personal example. A few months ago, I took a long train journey, about 4 hours, and during the journey, I finished an entire book. I had been trying to finish that book for 3 weeks, and I finally did it in one sitting on that train.
4 hours and a finished book, that is a productive journey.
It really was. And notice, during the journey. The journey is a noun, a clear event with a beginning and an end. During fits perfectly.
Mine is from last winter. I was at my cousin's wedding, and during the ceremony, my phone started ringing. I had forgotten to put it on silent. Everyone turned around. I wanted to disappear.
During the ceremony, the worst possible moment for that.
The absolute worst. And again, during the ceremony, a noun, an event. During fits naturally.
Now, there is one more thing about during that catches a lot of learners, and that is the difference between during and for.
During tells you when something happened. For tells you how long something lasted. They answer completely different questions and they are not interchangeable.
He fell asleep during the conference call tells you when he fell asleep, at some point within the call. He fell asleep for 20 minutes tells you how long he slept. Two completely different pieces of information.
And the mistake people make is saying he fell asleep during 20 minutes. During cannot be used with a number and a time unit. The moment you have hours, days, weeks, or minutes, you need for, not during.
But the reverse mistake is also worth knowing. You cannot use for with an event noun either. He fell asleep for the conference call sounds completely wrong. For goes with lengths of time. During goes with events and periods.
During the conference call, correct. For 20 minutes, correct. During 20 minutes, wrong. For the conference call, wrong. Each word has its own job and they do not overlap.
Now, during has a close relative, throughout. You'll hear it often, and it's easy to confuse with during because both are followed by a noun.
The difference is this. During means something happened at some point within a period. We don't know exactly when. Throughout means it happened continuously from the very beginning to the very end without stopping.
I kept getting distracted during the lecture, at some point within it, maybe just in the last 10 minutes. But I kept getting distracted throughout the lecture means it happened the whole time, from the moment it started to the moment it ended.
Which is something most of us have experienced and none of us should admit to.
Very much so. And one small thing, but very important. You'll hear during pronounced two ways by native speakers. Some say during and others say during. Both are completely correct. Don't let it confuse you when you hear it said differently.
So during needs a noun or a noun phrase. It tells you when something happened, not how long.
Which is exactly why during could not save me in my presentation story. I needed to say two things were happening at the same time, me presenting and the screen going blank. And for that, you need while.
While has the same core meaning, something happening in the middle of something else. But while connects two actions directly, and to do that, it needs a full sentence after it, not just a noun. This is the most important thing to understand about while. After while, you always need a subject and a verb, a complete action, two things happening at the same time.
While I was cooking, my flatmate called me from the other room. I is the subject, was cooking is the verb. A complete sentence follows while.
And notice, the while part can go at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. Both are equally natural. While I was cooking, my flatmate called me sounds exactly as natural as my flatmate called me while I was cooking. Native speakers use both without thinking about it.
Does the tense matter? Does while always need a continuous tense after it?
This is something a lot of learners wonder about. Continuous tense is the most natural and most common pattern after while, because while suggests something is ongoing, but it is not a rule. Any tense works.
You can say, I sent 3 emails while she was in her meeting, past continuous, very natural. But you can also say, I always drink coffee while I read the news in the morning, present simple, completely correct.
While simply means at the same time as, so the tense you use after while depends entirely on what you are describing, not on while itself.
Now, while connects 2 simultaneous actions, but those 2 actions can relate to each other in 2 different ways. The first is when both actions are going on at the same time with roughly equal duration.
I listened to a podcast while I was walking to the office. Both actions, listening and walking, are happening together for the same stretch of time.
The second is when one action is already ongoing and a shorter action interrupts it or happens within it.
While I was getting ready for work this morning, the electricity went off. Getting ready was the ongoing action. The electricity going off was the interruption. One long action, one shorter action that cuts through it.
I have a good example of that second type. Last week, I was in the middle of a video call with a client, and while I was talking, my cat jumped onto the desk and walked across the keyboard. The client saw everything.
What did the client say?
She laughed and said, "I think your cat wants to join the meeting." I wanted to close the laptop and pretend the whole thing never happened.
That is such a good example of the second type, though. You were already in the middle of something, the call was ongoing, and something completely unexpected happened within it.
Exactly. Talking was already happening. The cat just cut right through it.
Mine is from a few months ago. I was on a long drive back from visiting my parents, about 3 hours, and while I was driving, I had this sudden realization that I had left my laptop charger at their house. 3 hours from home.
That sinking feeling.
The worst feeling. I had 3 hours to think about it, too.
But that is a perfect example. The drive was already happening. It was the long, ongoing action. And right in the middle of it, something hit you.
Yes, the driving was continuous. The realization just landed somewhere inside it.
There is also a shorter way to use while that sounds very natural in everyday English. When both parts of the sentence are about the same person doing two things at once, you can drop the subject and the be verb and just use the ing form.
While I was waiting for my coffee, I checked my messages. Becomes, while waiting for my coffee, I checked my messages. The subject I and the be verb was are removed, and waiting is left on its own.
While I was walking home, I called my sister becomes while walking home, I called my sister. Shorter, more natural, very common in spoken English.
But this only works when both parts of the sentence are about the same person. The moment two different people are involved, you need the full sentence. You cannot drop anything.
While I was cooking, she set the table, two different people, I and she. The full clause is essential here. You cannot say, while cooking, she set the table, because that implies she was the one cooking.
And one small but important note, this shortened form sounds slightly more formal. In casual, everyday conversation, most people keep the full sentence. The short form appears more in writing and in careful speech.
Now, while has two other uses that are worth knowing briefly so you are not confused when you encounter them. The first is while used for contrast.
While does not always mean two things happening at the same time. Sometimes it means whereas, a difference between two situations. While my brother loves traveling, I prefer staying close to home. That is not about time at all. It is about contrast.
When while introduces a contrast, the two parts of the sentence describe different preferences or situations, not two simultaneous actions.
The second is while used as a noun, meaning a period of time. It has been a while since we last spoke. I'm going to rest for a while. Every once in a while, I cook something new. Here, while has nothing to do with two actions happening at the same time. It simply means some time.
One more thing, while has a close relative called whilst. Same meaning, same grammar, whilst just sounds slightly more formal and old-fashioned. You'll see it occasionally in British English, particularly in writing. In everyday conversation, while is always the natural choice.
And briefly, while also has a twin for simultaneous actions called as. She smiled as she opened the door. As works like while, but with one important difference. While can be followed by an ing form, as cannot. You can say while cooking, but you cannot say as cooking. As always needs a full subject and verb after it.
So, while needs a subject and a verb. It connects two things happening at the same time. The while clause can go first or last. Continuous tense is most natural, but any tense works. And if both parts are about the same person, you can shorten it to while plus ing.
Now, let's hear during and while working together in a real conversation. Two colleagues, Mia and Tom, are catching up over coffee after Mia returns from a week-long work trip. see if you can spot every time during and while appear, and notice why each one feels natural in that moment.
Ready, Ella?
Ready? Tom, I am so glad to be back. That trip completely wore me out.
What happened? You were only gone a week.
A week that felt like a month. So during the flight there, the passenger next to me decided to have a full phone conversation for about 40 minutes.
No headphones.
None. I was trying to review my notes while he was talking at full volume right next to my ear.
That is the worst possible start.
And it did not get better. During the first day of meetings, the projector stopped working right in the middle of my presentation.
During your actual presentation?
Yes. While I was standing at the front of the room with 30 people looking at me, complete silence. I just stood there for what felt like 10 minutes while the technical team tried to fix it.
What did you do?
I started talking them through the key points from memory. No slides, no notes. Just me standing there describing everything while my heart was beating very fast.
Impressive.
It worked out in the end. The client actually said afterwards that the presentation felt more personal without the slides, but I did not enjoy a single second of it.
How was the rest of the week?
The accommodation was terrible throughout the whole week. The room was directly above the hotel bar, so there was noise every night until about 2 in the morning.
So you were exhausted throughout the whole trip.
From the very first night to the very last. And the funniest thing happened during the final dinner with the client on Thursday evening.
What happened?
I was sitting there telling a story, doing quite well, feeling confident, and while I was talking, I realized I had been calling the client's director by the wrong name for 3 entire days.
No.
Yeah, his name is Richard. I had been calling him Robert for 3 days, and he had never corrected me.
He just let it go?
The whole time. Meanwhile, every single person on his team knew, and nobody said a word.
I cannot decide if that is kind or cruel.
I'm still not sure. Anyway, I'm very glad to be home.
Well, while you were going through all of that, things here were completely calm. Nothing happened all week.
Of course it was.
Did you catch them all? Let's go through what happened.
Every time during appeared, a noun followed. During the flight, during the first day of meetings, during the final dinner. In every case, an event or a period. No subject, no verb, just a noun.
And every time while appeared, a subject and a verb followed. While he was talking, while I was standing, while I was talking. 2 actions running at the same time, one providing the background, the other happening within it.
There was also one while plus ing. While talking, I realized I had been using the wrong name. Same subject throughout. Mia was both talking and realizing, so the subject and be verb were dropped naturally.
And notice, nobody in that conversation stopped to think about grammar once. Mia was just telling her story. The words appeared because the meaning demanded them.
During told you when things happened. While showed you 2 things running at the same time.
That is the goal. Not remembering the rules, feeling the words. Okay, let's bring everything together one final time. The rule that covers everything.
During needs a noun. While needs a sentence.
Write that down. Put it somewhere you can see it, because those 6 words will help you every single time you are not sure which one to use.
During tells you when something happened, always followed by a noun or a noun phrase, an event, a period of time, a situation, never a subject and a verb. And remember, during tells you when, not how long. The moment you need to say how long something lasted, the word you need is for.
While shows you 2 things happening at the same time, always followed by a subject and a verb. The while clause can go at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. Both feel completely natural to a native speaker.
And if both parts of the sentence are about the same person, you can shorten while plus subject plus be verb to just while plus ing. While I was waiting becomes while waiting. Natural, common, and slightly more formal.
And here is the honest truth about where you want to get to with these two words. Right now you are thinking about the rule every time you use them. That is completely normal. That is how learning works. But the goal is to keep going until you stop thinking about the rule at all, until during and while just feel right, the way words feel right in your own language. That only happens through practice. Real sentences, real conversations, out loud.
Now, your challenge. 2 sentences in the comments.
Sentence 1. Tell us something that happened during your last trip or holiday. Use during and follow it with a noun.
Sentence 2. Tell us something you were doing while something else happened. Use while and follow it with a subject and a verb.
2 sentences. Write them below. We read every single comment.
And if this episode helped you, if during and while finally feel clear, please subscribe. We make these episodes every week for exactly this reason.
And next time your laptop crashes in the middle of a presentation,
You will know exactly what to say.
during the presentation, my laptop crashed.
Or, while I was presenting, my laptop crashed. Both correct, both natural. That is the whole point.
Thank you so much for listening. We will see you in the next one.
See you next time.